Bane was the only Dark Lord of the Sith, the last of his kind. The burden of rebuilding the Order would fall to him. But this time, he'd do it right. Instead of many, there would be only two, one master and one apprentice, one to embody the power and one to crave it. To survive, the Sith had to vanish, becoming creatures of myth, legend, and nightmares. Hidden from the eyes of the Jedi, they could seek out the long-lost secrets of the dark side until its full power was theirs to command. Only then, once victory over their enemies was certain, would they tear aside the veil of shadows and reveal themselves. The path ahead was long and difficult. It might take years or decades before they could strike once more, perhaps even centuries. But Bane was patient. He understood what was to come and what must be done. Though he himself might not live to see the triumph of the dark side, those who followed him would carry on his legacy. Someday in the distant future, the Republic would fall and the Jedi would perish. The entire galaxy would bow down to a Dark Lord of the Sith. It was inevitable. It was the way of the dark side. Satisfied that his work on Ruusan was done, he began the long hike to where he'd hidden his ship. He knew the remaining Jedi would come looking for survivors, but by the time they arrived, he would be long gone. Still, there was something that troubled him. In order for all this to come to pass, he had to find a suitable apprentice. One strong in the Force, but not yet tainted by the teachings of the Jedi. Somewhere, he needed to find a child worthy of becoming heir to all the power of the dark side. Bane had found Zannah huddled beside a dead bouncer, one of Ruusan's few native species. Strewn around her were the bodies of two Jedi, each with their necks twisted in unnatural positions. Even then, he had felt the power of the dark side flowing through her. Although it was raw and unrestrained, it was full of potential. Potential enough, Bane knew, to someday even surpass him. That had been nearly 10 years ago, and he realized now that his faith had not been misplaced. Despite her young age, Zannah was cunning, deceptive, and secretive, yet knew how to use her physical powers to afford her the best advantage. Furthermore, she possessed the rare talent of Sith sorcery, and Bane had been all too eager to indulge her growing curiosities in the matter. To complete her current task, she would likely require all these skills and more. The past few months had convinced Bane that the orbalisks that plagued his body were causing more harm than good. They often drove him into uncontrollable fits of dark side rage, and aged his body multitudes faster than was the norm. Once, he had almost killed his apprentice. In the hopes of ridding his body of these parasitic insects, Bane had sent Zannah to the depths of the Republic, into the Jedi Temple itself, to gather any information she could. In the meantime, Bane had ventured to the deep core world of Tython, in search of the holocron of the ancient Sith Lord Belia Darzu. Within it, he hoped to discover the secrets of constructing such a device of his own. Zannah's task was scheduled to take weeks, and he had specifically told her not to come to Tython, so it was an unexpected and rather unwanted surprise when Bane saw the form of a ship appear on the horizon. When Zannah's ship came into land, Bane stood impassively, waiting for Zannah to emerge. When she did, there was a young man with her. The Dark Lord could feel the Force in him, though its presence was weak. When he saw that the man was missing his right hand, everything fell into place. This was her brother, the young boy that had attempted to stop Zannah from leaving Ruusan with Bane. What Bane didn't know was that the young boy was now a healer, and that Zannah had the cure he needed. The sight of another ship appearing over his apprentice's shoulder, still too far in the distance to make out a model or affiliation, put an end to his thoughts. An instant later, he felt the unmistakable light side power of those on board. Finally, after decades of searching, the Jedi had found him, the last remaining Sith Lord of the Brotherhood of Darkness. Jedi Master Rastala Su was the Order's greatest swordsman. During her battles with the Brotherhood, even the best of the Sith struggled to match her in combat. Master Valentine Farfalla had been Hoth's right man, and a fearsome combatant. To take his flamboyant exterior for granted was to invite death. The Jedi Knight Saro Zaj stood over 2 meters tall and was 150 kilos of raw muscle. But he was still quick enough to snatch a zest fly out of the air. Master Warrer had been instrumental in many of the Republic's victories against the Sith. His unique gift of battle meditation provided others in the army with unbreakable will and unwearable strength. The Jedi Knight Jahun Othone was the group's only weak link. Once an apprentice to Lord Hoth himself, he had largely been a diplomat to the Supreme Chancellor before incidentally discovering the Sith's presence on Tython. That left 4 extremely proficient duelists, effectively the best the Order had to offer, against a Sith Lord and his apprentice. But it was 2 minutes before the first 3 were dead, the 4th lie dying, and Darth Bane moved to kill the 5th. But even as the Dark Lord drew in torrents of Force lightning and envisioned the young knight's violent death within his mind, the wounded warrior threw a protective bubble around Bane's body. The lightning, instead of arcing across and into Othone's unprotected form, deflected back into the Sith Lord's body, killing the Orbalisks and frying him. In response, the parasites released a deadly toxin to Bane, threatening to kill him. Ending Othone's life with a quick slash of her lightsaber, Zannah decided to take Bane to Ambria, to the residence of Caleb. Bane wanted to shout, to scream, to bellow in anger at his own helplessness. The cure had worked, but though his mind was whole, his broken body would force him to watch as his apprentice tore the Sith Order apart. Caleb had healed Bane, but only at the cost of alerting the Jedi of their presence. Zannah had relented, and now everything he had built, his revelation of the Rule of Two, was going to die with him. As he began to drift off, he had asked then for Zannah to end his life. She had denied him even that small relief. The next time Bane regained consciousness, it was in his ship. He could feel no other presence than Zannah, who sat beside him in quiet meditation. Where was he? What was he doing here? Then he remembered. Eyes flying open, Bane seized his apprentice's wrist, fixing her with a look of pure hatred as he asked her about the Jedi, about Caleb, about the future of the Order. But as he listened, his anger faded and formed into pride. Zannah had killed Caleb and twisted her brother's mind as so to trick the Jedi into thinking he was the Sith Lord. When he had prompted her about his earlier request, she had responded perfectly. "You still have much to teach me," Zannah had reminded him. "I will continue to study at your feet, Master. I will learn from your wisdom. I will discover your secrets, unlocking them one by one until everything you know, all your knowledge and power, is mine. And once you are no longer of use to me, I will destroy you." Upon hearing this, Bane knew once again that he had chosen his apprentice well. Ten standard years had passed since Darth Bane, the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, had lost his Orbalisk armor. 10 years since his body had been burned beyond recognition by his own devastating power. 10 years since the healer Caleb had brought him back from the brink of death, and Zannah had tricked the Jedi into believing the Sith were extinct. Bane was in his mid-40s now, and the first faint scars of time and age had begun to leave their marks on his body. The aging process was subtle, but inescapable. Bane accepted this, but it also revealed a fatal flaw of the Rule of Two, He had thought his rule ensured the power of both master and apprentice would grow from generation to generation. But as he peered into the holocron, his holocron, resting on the pedestal before him, he wondered if Zannah would ever prove herself worthy of its possession. He had chosen Zannah knowing that she had the potential to one day surpass even his own abilities. On that day, she would usurp him as Dark Lord of the Sith and choose an apprentice of her own. Bane would die, but the Sith would live on, stronger than before. Or so he had once believed. Now there was doubt in his mind. 2 decades had passed since he had plucked the young girl from the battlefields of Ruusan, yet Zannah still seemed content merely to serve. She had embraced his lessons and had shown an incredible affinity for the Force. Over the years, Bane had tracked her progress carefully, and he could no longer say with certainty which one of them would survive a confrontation between them. But her reluctance to challenge him had left her master wondering if Zannah lacked the fierce ambition necessary to become the Dark Lord of the Sith. Of the many possibilities, Bane found one the most troubling. Perhaps Zannah had noticed his deteriorating physical abilities and had simply decided to wait. In 5 years, his body would be a ruined husk, and she could dispatch him with virtually no risk. In most circumstances, Bane would have admired the strategy. But in this case, it flew in the face of the most fundamental tenets of the rule of 2. In that case, he needed a contingency, something that would extend his life or restore his body. Or, Bane wondered, replace it with another. The steps to the Jedi Temple were long and arduous, and were possessed of a spiritual nature unlike any Sarah had ever seen or felt before. She traveled to the temple as a representative of the Kingdom of Doan. As the Princess of Doan, and widow to the recently passed Prince Garen, Sarah technically possessed the authority to negotiate on behalf of the royal family. But this was an extraordinary case. A Jedi Knight had been killed on Doan, and seeing as Sarah's own bodyguard, Lucia, was partly responsible, she'd been forced to undertake the mission. Even still, she didn't blame Lucia. Her loyal bodyguard had only been trying to help assuage the terrible guilt Sarah still felt at her husband's death. The target had died, but unfortunately, so had the Jedi. Master Oba of the Council of First Knowledge led her around the temple, showing her various artifacts and monuments to past glories, as well as sorrows that would rather have been forgotten. But one monument caught Sarah's eye. 5 Jedi names were listed on a large, ornately carved stone plaque, along with a 6th. Tears fell from Sarah's eyes even as her mind processed the names: Valentine Farfalla, Rasta Lasu, Saru Zaj, Warer, Jahuna Thone, and Caleb, her father. Sarah still remembered her father's bravery, how he had stood his ground before hundreds of dying threats, from Jedi and Sith alike. But most of all, she remembered the one man who had broken her father's iron will. The tall, dark-clad Sith Lord who had used her father's love for her as leverage. She knew deep inside it was his doing. She knew her father was dead at his hand. Sarah had been a victim her whole life. This time, she intended to act. The ritual of essence transfer allowed the user to transfer his spirit into the body of another, providing his will was stronger than the victim's. And now, Bane knew of its existence. Seeking to buy the time necessary for a trip to and fro the ancient Sith's fortress on Prakith, where the secrets to the power lied, Bane had sent Zannah halfway across the galaxy to Doan, where she'd been tasked with discovering the identity of the Outer Rim planet's mysterious Jedi-killing assassin. The diversion was a success, but Bane had forgotten to consider a single, wildly unlikely circumstance. That knowledge of his survival, and in turn, the knowledge of the Sith too, existed, Upon his return to SithReign 4, Bane was surprised to find Zannah's ship still gone, but he was grateful that she wouldn't be waiting for him back at the mansion. He was in no shape to do battle with her now. He was even too tired to come up with a lie suitable enough to explain his absence. Yet, as his airspeeder approached his mansion on the horizon, he felt a powerful, yet strangely muted dark side presence come within his mind's periphery. He opened the door to the mansion and stepped inside, letting it swing shut behind him. He froze as he felt the intruders, 20-odd men, hiding around corners, on the stairs, behind furniture, everywhere. Less than 1/10 of a second later, sonic detonators on either side of him went off, causing him to stumble forward into the room and into the trap the intruders had set for him. They poured out like a swarm of insects, sending barrage after barrage of bolts raining down from either side of the balcony. But even as Bane threw up a protective barrier to shield himself, he felt something fighting him, some power blocking his ability to call upon the Force. It wasn't powerful enough to stop him entirely, but it was enough of a hindrance that a bolt snuck through its normally impenetrable barrier, striking him in the chest and bringing him down in a flash of pain. He wasn't down for long. Jumping back up, he threw bolts of violet lightning towards areas where he had seen the bolts come from. He was rewarded by screams of several of the intruders as they fell. Even as he moved in for the kill, a pair of soldiers emerged from the hallway on the left, and 3 more appeared from the hallway on the right. They opened fire with tangle guns, sending out long streams of sticky, synthetic webbing. Driven upward by the attack, Bane leapt up, grabbing onto the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Swinging forward, he landed next to the stairs leading back onto the foyer. To his right, a female Itachi stood at the far end of the hall, a long, thin knife held in each hand. She grinned at him, and in that moment he knew who was interfering with his ability to use the Force. It was only then that he realized the flash grenades lying by the dead bodies at his feet. They exploded with a burst of intense light and chemical smoke that blinded Bane, and an instant later, he felt the sole of the Itachi's boots strike him hard in the chest, sending him tumbling backwards. A moment later, he felt the webbing of the tangle guns pinning him to the ground. Even blind and immobilized, Darth Bane's fury saved him. Years of training allowed him to focus all his pain and rage in one single instant, drawing on it so he could unleash the full power of the dark side. Once again, he felt the Itachi's barrier opposing his efforts, but this time he tore through it like it wasn't even there. For a moment, it was as if the world around him was frozen in place. Though his eyes were still suffering from the effects of the flash grenade, the force rushing through his body gave him an otherworldly awareness of his surroundings. The scene was burned into his brain in exquisite detail. Unleashing a wave of crackling electricity that burned away the webbing, Bane struggled to avoid the Itachi even as she leapt for him. He managed to roll aside, escaping with only a long, deep cut along one of his forearms. The Itachi was good, and he knew killing her was the key to victory. Calling upon the Force, he called the lightsaber to his hand and lunged for the Itachi. The soldiers fired from all sides, but now, with the Force to guide his every move, they were no more than annoyances. But the Itachi was quicker than Bane expected, and she was able to evade his strikes even as he struggled to disarm or otherwise incapacitate her. Jumping down from the balcony, Bane landed on the floor in a crouch, absorbing the impact. Then everything went black. The last thing he felt was the slow burn on the underside of his forearm, where the assassin's knife had been. Zannah knew something was wrong the moment she landed on SithReign 4. She'd returned expecting a fight, but her master was nowhere to be seen. The deck officer had told her Bane had recently returned from a trip to Prakith, but that didn't make any sense. There was nothing but danger and potential death waiting on the unstable hyperlane routes to the deep core worlds. Would Bane risk his life for nothing? No, that wasn't the master she knew. Likewise, the mansion was in a deplorable state. The windows were cracked, the front door broken, and the chandelier lying shattered in the middle of the entrance room. It was obvious that something had occurred here, but what? There were still too many unknowns for her to make a plausible guess. Then, while exploring the destroyed remains of her ruined mansion, Zannah found a small blue button, wedged into the wreckage of what used to be a large couch, inscribed with the golden insignia of the Doan royal family. In a flash of comprehension, Zannah understood. Her trip to Doan had been little more than a diversion, something to distract her as Bane traveled to the deep core, and to the fortress of Darth Endedu, an ancient Sith Lord who thousands years prior had discovered the secret to immortality. She felt betrayed and angry. Bane, knowing the end to his physical form was near, was searching for a way to extend his life forever. It was the only plausible explanation. It was also a perversion of the rule of two, a contradiction of everything he had taught her. The day he had found her on the ruins of Ruusan, Bane had promised her the mantle of the Sith, told her that one day she would become the Dark Lord of the Sith and thus carry on his legacy. And now, Bane's actions proved that he was no longer worthy of its mantle. Getting back into the ship, she plotted a course for Doan. "Be ready, Master. Only one of us will make it off this planet alive."